The conference room at Naval Air Station Oceana fell silent when she walked in wearing civilian clothes. Commander Rita Vasquez had flown over 100 combat missions in 7 years, but today she stood before a review board that looked at her like she was a stranger. The lead investigator, a man with silver stars on his shoulders and no combat ribbons on his chest, slid a folder across the table. "Lieutenant Commander Vasquez," he said, his voice flat and bureaucratic, "we need you to surrender your uniform. Pending investigation into the incident over the Strait of Hormuz, you're grounded indefinitely." She didn't move. Her fingers rested on the edge of the table, steady as iron. "Sir, with respect, I'd like to know what incident you're referring to." The investigator's jaw tightened. "The unauthorized weapons release that resulted in the destruction of a foreign naval vessel." "You fired without clearance." Rita's eyes narrowed. "I fired on a gunboat that had locked targeting radar on a downed American pilot in open water. I saved his life." Another board member, a captain with thinning hair and a politician's smile, leaned forward. "That's not how Tehran sees it, and right now we're trying to avoid a diplomatic catastrophe." She let the silence hang for a moment. Then she stood, reached into her jacket, and pulled out a small brass trident pin. He set it on the table with a soft click. The room froze. The lead investigator blinked. "What is that?" Rita's voice was calm, almost gentle. "That's my SEAL trident, sir. I earned it before I ever sat in a cockpit, before I flew combat missions in 3 theaters, before I pulled a pilot out of the water while his ejection seat was still burning." The captain's face went pale. You were a SEAL," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "For 6 years. Then I went to flight school. So when you tell me to take off my uniform," she let the words settle like stones, "you're not just grounding a pilot, you're telling a naval special warfare operator that she doesn't understand rules of engagement." The investigator shifted in his seat. The folder in front of him suddenly seemed very thin. We weren't informed of your service record." Rita picked up the trident and slipped it back into her pocket. "That's because I don't lead with it. I let my work speak." She turned toward the door, then paused. "But if you want my uniform, sir, you'll have to take it, because I earned every thread." The story began 3 weeks earlier, in the pale light of dawn over the Arabian Sea. The carrier deck was alive with the scream of jet engines and the sharp tang of salt and fuel. Rita stood beside her FA-18F Super Hornet, running her hand along the cold metal of the fuselage. The aircraft was a Block II variant, 44,000 pounds of thrust and precision-guided death, painted in low-visibility gray with her call sign stenciled beneath the canopy. Reaper 6. Her weapons systems officer, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, climbed into the rear seat with the easy confidence of someone who'd flown with her for 2 years. "Morning, Reaper," he said over the internal comms. "You ready for another milk run?" She didn't answer immediately. She was watching the horizon, where the sky met the water in a line so sharp it could cut. "No such thing as a milk run out here, Halo," she said quietly. "Not anymore." The briefing had been straightforward. Combat air patrol over international waters, maintain station, discourage aggressive posturing by Iranian fast-attack craft. Standard show of force. But Rita had learned long ago that standard didn't exist in combat. The unexpected was the only constant. She strapped in, ran through her pre-flight checks with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, and signaled the deck crew. The catapult officer gave the launch signal. 2 seconds later, the steam catapult hurled 30 tons of aircraft off the deck at 160 miles per hour. The transition from ship to sky was violent and absolute. Rita's body pressed into the seat as the Super Hornet clawed for altitude, the twin engines roaring behind her. "Reaper 6 airborne," she reported, "climbing to Angels 20. The carrier's air traffic controller responded immediately. "Copy, Reaper 6. Proceed to station. Maintain CAP." She banked east toward the rising sun, toward the invisible line where international waters met contested seas. Below her, the ocean was a sheet of hammered steel. Above, the sky was empty and waiting. The patrol station was a block of airspace 30 miles long and 20 wide, an invisible cage drawn in coordinates and altitude bands. Rita flew lazy circles at 20,000 feet, her radar sweeping the horizon in steady pulses. The systems hummed quietly. Everything was routine. Everything was calm. And that's when her threat warning receiver chirped. It was a soft sound, almost polite, but it sent ice through her veins. "Halo, I've got a radar spike," she said. "Bearing 095, low altitude." Marcus checked his displays. "I see it. Surface contact. Looks like a fast attack craft maybe 12 miles out." Rita zoomed her radar. The contact was moving fast, cutting through the water at 40 knots. "That's a boghammer," she said. "Iranian Revolutionary Guard." The radio crackled. "Reaper 6, this is Overlord. We're tracking your contact. Maintain station and observe." She clicked her mic twice in acknowledgement, but her hand drifted to the weapons panel. The Super Hornet carried 2 AGM-65 Mavericks, 4 AIM-120 AMRAAMs, and a full load of 20mm ammunition. She hoped she wouldn't need any of it. The boghammer changed course, angling northeast. Rita followed it with her radar, watching the vector shift. Then her blood went cold. "Overlord, Reaper 6. That boat is heading toward a distress beacon. I'm picking up an emergency locator transmitter bearing 097, 11 miles." There was a pause. Then Reaper 6, stand by. She didn't stand by. She pushed the throttles forward and dropped the nose. The Super Hornet accelerated like a bullet, the airspeed indicator climbing past 400 knots. "Halo, get me a visual on that beacon." Marcus worked his sensors. "Got it. Single personnel in the water, looks like." "Jesus, Reaper, that's an ejection seat. Somebody punched out." Rita's mind raced. An American pilot in the water. An Iranian gunboat closing fast. And somewhere above, the bureaucratic wheels of command grinding too slowly to matter. She leveled off at 5,000 feet, close enough to see the boghammer clearly now. It was a 30-foot speedboat with a mounted machine gun and a crew of 6. They were heading straight for the pilot in the water. Rita's radio crackled again. "Reaper 6, Overlord, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Diplomatic situation is fragile." She didn't respond. She armed the Maverick missile and locked the targeting pod onto the boat. The crosshairs were steady. The range was perfect. But she didn't fire, not yet. Instead, she dropped to 2,000 feet and opened the throttles. The Super Hornet screamed over the boghammer at 600 miles per hour, close enough that the sonic pressure wave sent spray erupting from the water. The boat rocked violently. The crew scattered. She pulled up hard, the G-forces crushing her into the seat, and climbed back to altitude. "Overlord, Reaper 6. I just gave them a warning pass. They're still closing on the pilot." The controller's voice was tight. "Reaper 6, you are ordered to maintain distance and observe. Do not escalate." Rita looked down at the water. The pilot was waving, a tiny figure in an orange survival vest, surrounded by miles of empty ocean. The boghammer was less than a mile away now, and she made her decision. "Halo," she said quietly. "If this goes sideways, I need you to trust me." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, Reaper." She nosed over into a dive, locked the Maverick, and waited. The targeting radar from the boghammer painted her aircraft. The threat warning receiver screamed. They were aiming at her now, and that changed everything. "Overlord, Reaper 6, I am being illuminated by targeting radar. I have a hostile lock, engaging in self-defense." She didn't wait for a response. She pickled the Maverick. The missile dropped free, ignited, and streaked toward the water in a column of white smoke. The Maverick covered the distance in 4 seconds. The explosion was a blossom of orange flame and black smoke that rose 100 feet into the air. The boghammer disintegrated, pieces of fiberglass and metal spinning across the water. The shock wave radiated outward in perfect rings. Rita didn't watch. She was already turning toward the pilot, descending to 500 feet, slowing to 200 knots. She could see him clearly now, treading water, his helmet still on, his eyes tracking her jet. She flew a slow circle around him, a protective orbit, and keyed her radio. "Overlord, Reaper 6. Hostile vessel destroyed. Pilot is alive. Request immediate search and rescue." The silence on the other end lasted 5 seconds. Then, "Reaper 6, SAR is en route. Return to carrier immediately." She didn't return immediately. She stayed in that orbit, flying low and slow, until the rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon. Only when she saw the pilot being lifted from the water did she turn southwest, toward the carrier, toward whatever was waiting for her. The flight back was the longest of her life. She knew what she'd done. She knew the cost, and she'd do it again without hesitation. When she landed, the deck crew avoided her eyes. When she climbed out of the cockpit, an officer was waiting with orders to report to the captain. And when she walked into that office, she saw the look on his face and knew her career was over. Unless she fought back, the next 72 hours were a blur of debriefings, reports, and quiet conversations in rooms with no windows. The pilot she'd saved, a lieutenant named Kevin Drummond, was medevaced to Germany. He never got a chance to speak on her behalf. The Iranian government lodged a formal protest. The media picked up the story, but they didn't have her name. Not yet. Rita spent those days in a holding pattern, grounded, waiting. She didn't sleep much. She ran 10 miles every morning on the carrier's flight deck, pounding the same oval track until her legs burned and her mind went quiet. On the third day, Marcus found her in the ready room. "They're flying you stateside," he said. "Tomorrow morning, they're convening a board." She nodded slowly. "What kind of board?" He hesitated. "The kind that decides if you keep your wings." She looked at him for a long moment. "You testified. I told them the truth, that you saved a man's life." She smiled faintly. "Thanks, Halo." He sat down beside her. "You know what they're going to ask, right? They're going to ask why you didn't wait for clearance." Rita stared at the wall, at the squadron patch mounted in a frame, a Grim Reaper holding a missile, wings spread wide. "Because clearance takes time," she said. "And that pilot didn't have time." Marcus nodded. "I know, but they're going to say you violated protocol. That you escalated a diplomatic incident." She turned to face him. "Would you have done it differently?" He didn't answer right away. Then he shook his head. "No, I'd have done exactly what you did." The next morning, she boarded a C-2 Greyhound for the flight to Bahrain, then a military transport to Virginia. She traveled in silence, surrounded by cargo and Marines who didn't know her story. When she landed at Oceana, there was no one waiting. No ceremony, no acknowledgement. Just a staff car and a driver who barely spoke. And then the conference room, the review board, the demand for her uniform, and the moment she put that trident on the table. The lead investigator stared at the empty chair where Rita had been sitting. He looked at the captain, then at the third board member, a Navy lawyer who'd been taking notes in silence. "Did anyone know she was a SEAL?" he asked. The lawyer shook his head. "It's not in the standard file. You have to pull her full service record. Most people don't bother." The captain rubbed his temples. "This complicates things." "It simplifies them," the lawyer said quietly. "If she's right about the rules of engagement and she was being targeted, then the shoot was justified under self-defense doctrine. Add in her SEAL background and the argument that she didn't understand tactical decision-making falls apart." The investigator leaned back in his chair. "Tehran doesn't care about doctrine. They want blood." "They want accountability," the lawyer corrected. "There's a difference. And if we throw a decorated SEAL and combat pilot under the bus to avoid a diplomatic headache, it's going to leak. And when it leaks, the story won't be about Iran. It'll be about us sacrificing our own people." The room went quiet. Outside, the sound of jet engines roared as another sortie launched. The investigator closed the folder. "Get me her full record," he said. "Every mission, every commendation, everything." The lawyer nodded and left. The captain stayed behind. "You think she's telling the truth?" he asked. The investigator looked at him. "I think she's exactly the kind of person who doesn't lie, and that's going to make this harder, not easier." While the board deliberated, Rita walked across the base to the SEAL compound. It was a low, unremarkable building behind layers of security fencing. She showed her ID at the gate. The guard, a young petty officer, looked at her twice. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." She tapped the trident pin on her jacket. "I know." He made a phone call. 2 minutes later, a man in fatigues emerged from the building. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from granite. When he saw Rita, he stopped. "Reaper," he said. She smiled. "Master Chief." He crossed the distance between them and pulled her into a crushing hug. "Heard you've been lighting fires over the Gulf." Something like that. He stepped back, studying her face. "You okay?" She nodded. "I will be." He gestured toward the building. "Come on, let's talk." Inside, the compound was exactly as she remembered, sparse, functional, no wasted space. They sat in a corner office with maps on the walls and a rifle rack in the corner. The Master Chief poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "So," he said, You told a board full of officers that you're a SEAL. I told them the truth, he grinned. And how'd that go? They looked like I'd slapped them. He laughed, a deep rumbling sound. I bet they did. You always had a gift for uncomfortable honesty. Rita sipped her coffee. It was terrible, just like she remembered. They want to hang this on me, Master Chief. The shoot, the diplomatic mess, all of it. He nodded slowly. You know why, right? It's easier to sacrifice one pilot than to admit the rules of engagement are a mess. It's easier to blame you than to fix the system. I know. So what are you going to do? She looked at him. I'm going to make them see the whole picture, not just the incident, the context, the mission, the pilot I saved. The Master Chief leaned forward. You need witnesses. I need the truth to be louder than the politics. He smiled. Then you've got us. Every SEAL who ever served with you will testify if you need it. You know that, right? She felt something loosen in her chest. Thanks. The hearing resumed 2 days later, but the room was different. Larger, more crowded. Rita sat at a long table with a Navy lawyer beside her, a sharp-eyed woman named Commander Angela Park who specialized in military justice. Across from them, the review board had expanded to include a rear admiral and a representative from the State Department. The investigator opened the session with a grim expression. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, we've reviewed your full service record. It's extensive. Rita said nothing. Commander Park placed a thick binder on the table. For the record, Lieutenant Commander Vasquez has flown 112 combat missions across 3 deployments. She has 2 distinguished flying crosses, a Silver Star and a Navy Cross. Prior to aviation, she served 6 years in naval special warfare, including deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. She has no disciplinary record. The State Department representative, a man in a gray suit with tired eyes, cleared his throat. Commander, no one is questioning Lieutenant Commander Vasquez's service. We're questioning her judgment in a highly sensitive situation. Park didn't blink. Then let's talk about judgment. The pilot she saved, Lieutenant Kevin Drummond, was shot down by a surface-to-air missile fired from an Iranian patrol boat. He ejected over international waters. Under maritime law and the Geneva Conventions, he was a non-combatant in distress. The Iranian gunboat that approached him was not conducting a rescue operation. They were armed, they locked targeting radar on Lieutenant Commander Vasquez's aircraft, and they showed clear hostile intent. The investigator leaned forward. How do we know their intent? Rita spoke for the first time. Because I've spent 7 years flying over hostile waters, sir. I know what a rescue looks like. And I know what a capture operation looks like. They weren't coming to help him. They were coming to take him. The State Department representative frowned. That's speculation. It's experience, Rita said, and it's the kind of judgment call pilots make every day, because we don't have the luxury of committee meetings and legal reviews when someone's life is on the line. The rear admiral, who'd been silent until now, spoke. His voice was calm, measured. Lieutenant Commander, walk me through your decision, step by step. Rita straightened in her chair. Yes, sir. I was on station conducting combat air patrol. I detected the distress beacon at approximately 0900 local time. I reported it immediately to Overlord. I observed the Iranian gunboat altering course toward the beacon. I assessed the situation as time critical. Why time critical? Because the pilot had been in the water for at least 10 minutes. Hypothermia was a factor. Survival time in those waters is limited, and the gunboat was closing at high speed. The admiral nodded. Continue. I requested guidance from Overlord. I was told to observe. I conducted a low pass to signal the gunboat to back off. They ignored it and continued closing. Then they locked targeting radar on my aircraft. The room went still. Are you certain it was a targeting lock? The investigator asked. Marcus Hale's voice came from the back of the room. I can confirm that, sir. Everyone turned. Marcus stood near the door, still in his flight suit. I was the WSO on that mission. We received a clear radar lock from the gunboat. Our threat warning system identified it as fire control radar. They were preparing to engage. The investigator looked at the admiral, then back at Rita. And that's when you fired, Rita nodded. Yes, sir. Under the standing rules of engagement, I had the right to defend my aircraft and the right to protect a downed American aviator from hostile forces. The State Department representative rubbed his face. This is going to be a nightmare to explain to Tehran. With respect, sir, Commander Park said, Tehran knows exactly what happened. They sent an armed gunboat to capture an American pilot in international waters. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez stopped them. If anyone violated international law, it was Iran. The Rear Admiral looked at Rita for a long moment. Do you regret your decision, Lieutenant Commander? She met his eyes. No, sir, I regret that I was put in a position where I had to make it, but I don't regret saving that pilot's life. The Admiral nodded slowly. Noted. He turned to the investigator. I want a full tactical review. I want the radar data, the radio transcripts, everything. And I want Lieutenant Drummond's statement as soon as he's cleared to give it. The investigator nodded. Yes, sir. The Admiral stood. This hearing is adjourned pending further evidence. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, you remain grounded until we reach a final determination. Rita stood and saluted. Understood, sir. As the board filed out, Commander Park leaned close. That went better than I expected. Rita didn't smile. It's not over yet. Outside, Marcus caught up with her. You okay? She nodded. Thanks for showing up. I told you I'm with you. They walked across the tarmac in silence, the wind carrying the smell of jet fuel and salt. Above them, a pair of FA-18s launched into the pale sky, their afterburners painting the air with fire. Rita watched them climb until they disappeared into the blue, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. The wait stretched into a week. Rita spent her days running, reading, and avoiding the news. The story had leaked, of course. It always did. The headlines were predictable. Navy pilot shoots down Iranian boat. Diplomatic crisis in the Gulf. Pentagon investigates unauthorized strike. But then something shifted. A retired admiral went on television and defended her decision. A former SEAL wrote an op-ed calling her a hero. And Lieutenant Kevin Drummond from his hospital bed in Germany gave an interview. She saved my life, he said, his voice hoarse but steady. I was in the water watching that boat come closer and I knew what was going to happen. Then I heard her jet. I saw her make that first pass, and when she fired, I